Sal, where are we at in the state of the Bills? Linebackers is the last one I saw, I think.
Because I just posted cornerbacks before I came on the air.
Oh, you did? Okay.
So, yep. So we can talk about both of them if you'd like. My goal is to get that done, and I was able to before I came on with you guys. I wanted to do that in case you wanted to talk about it. But I did do linebackers a couple days ago, and I just did corners now. So wherever you'd like to start is fine with me.
Well, corners, there are lots of questions.
Sorry, I'm going to scream, why aren't you guys talking about DK Metcalf?
We will.
Yeah, we will.
I mean,
sure, right?
Right or wrong, one of those two positions is pretty stable, and the other is definitely not.
I think you could look at it that way. But as I examine it, it's really interesting, guys. Out of all the positions here on the team, these two are maybe the two most outside of, I guess, well, yeah, I don't even want to say that because O-line. Here's the deal. Both of these positions have 6 guys under contract and only 1 pending free agent. That's it. The difference is the 1 pending free agent for corner is a starter. The 1 pending free agent for linebacker is a practice squad guy. So that's it. But otherwise, they have 6 guys under contract and only 12 total guys coming back under contract, 2 guys who are scheduled to be free agents. And I would say a big similarity would be here. You got 2 really important players who are going into the final year of their deals: Terrell Bernard at linebacker and Christian Benford at corner.
Right. And so, yeah, Benford has been sort of at the top of a lot of fans' minds, I think, this offseason. Not that getting Shakir done ahead of him was like offensive or anything. Fine. I like that contract, and I like Shakir very much. But Benford is that should be close to a top of market contract, don't you think? Close. I'm not saying he's going to get, he's going to be the number 1 paid corner in the league when he signs his deal, like Trey White was for a few minutes before Jalen Ramsey came in off the top rope over the top of him. But it's going to be competitive for sure. I would think it's warranted, right?
I agree with you. I wrote in the article that when his contract is done, his next contract, it's going to be very lucrative. So however you want to take that, it's at near the top of the market, whatever, it's going to be a lucrative deal. He's a very, very good player. I think the Bills would really love to have him back. The question is, as it is with a lot of these guys, Terrell Bernard, Greg Rousseau, and James Cook, now that Shakir is done, do you try to get something done now, or do you wait? And if you do wait, you could tag him. The corner tag next year, probably $22 million, I think is estimated. It's a little over 20 this year. So you could tag him next year, but that would eat up your, a lot of your cap space while you do it. But there's some, you still have control here. But if you go out and do it now, you are committing big dollars, I think, to Christian Benford going forward for sure.
But it probably is still almost always better to get in. One of the things I liked about the timing of the Shakir deal is it was ahead of all this that's coming here, the tail end of this week and into next week when free agency actually opens. Everything usually goes up. So the sooner I could get Benford done, I don't know if they're striving to get this done before the marketplace opens and a lot of guys get paid, but usually you're better off doing that. If you wait, you usually pay somewhat of a penalty.
I agree with that. I would also add that, I did not think they'd be able to lower Shakir's cap number, but they did that because they added a void year. And you'd always think about that, and that's something I should have thought at the time. But by adding a void year, they had 1 more year to spread it out. They actually lowered Shakir's cap number from 3 and change to 2 and change. They saved almost $1 million. They could do the same thing with Benford this year.
Right.
His salary cap number is 3.4. They could sign him to an extension, even though it's going to be a big one, add 2 void years because you could do that. And you could literally lower it by a little bit or just keep it kind of near where it is. So it really doesn't penalize you this year, but then you'd have those bigger cap hits, obviously, in future years. And I guess you'd also have to think about, what else you have on the roster when it comes to Benford. There's the part of he's a really good player, but also what's on the outside, because are you bringing back Rasul Douglas? That's a really interesting question. He didn't have the half year he had in Buffalo the year before that. I do like Jamarcus Ingram a lot. You guys know that. We've talked about him a lot here the last couple of years. Is he ready for a starting role? I'm not really sure. Maybe. I like what I've seen from him. And then really there's a whole lot of because Kaiir Elam hasn't worked out, and that's really been the issue here at corner, I think, when we talk about a lot of these things, is him just not working out as that first-round pick.
Where do you land on corner as a draft priority then? Is that day 2? Is it day 3?
I think it might be day 2. Tell me what happens with Rasul Douglas, I guess, Mike, and I would have a better answer for you.
Or in free agency period. Yeah, right.
I don't know any more than you do, of course, but I'm guessing he's out. I would guess that he's out. He wasn't great, and at the dollars he was making, I would think that they would try to go elsewhere. Assuming they have some respectable way of doing that.
Yeah, if we sit here, a week before the draft, and we could look at what they have in the roster and say, oh, they definitely have their 2 starting outside corners, which would that mean that either that they would sign somebody free agency? Then I think it becomes at least a day 2 spot, but it could be day 3 for sure, because I want to know what happens to Elam. As I just wrote about, the Bills they're scheduled. They have to pay Kaiir Elam like over $4 million. It's guaranteed this year. It's a rookie contract, $4 million. Even if they trade him, they have to pay him that. It's dead cap money. I'm sorry, even if they release him. If they release him, they have to pay him that. Mm-hmm. If they trade him, the trading team only takes on 2.5. Like, I think that's the best scenario, where if the Bills could look to deal him to another team, that trading team would only take on his base salary, essentially. The roster, the bonus is already due. And I just think you look around the roster, and that's part of it. And sure, they're always going to want more corners. And, I don't know if they would feel comfortable with Jamarcus Ingram stepping into a starting role right now.
Do you think there's a market for Elam? I mean, he's still young, and there'd be teams, active GMs who would have liked him, in the draft process. So maybe. But whatever it is, it's going to look bad, right? I mean, you're probably you're just about giving him away.
You'd hope to do as well as the Jaguars did trading Christian Kirk today.
Right. I mean, you could, if you go to, all 31 teams and say, hey, we want to give us anything. You're not going to get anything. You might get a 6th rounder. That's fine if you can get anything at all.
Yeah.
But then if you're the Bills, you trade them. You're clearing $2.5 million. They'd still be responsible for 1.7 dead money. The Bills would, but I mean that would be a nice savings for them if they could clear them off the books. And at this point, I just think after what we've all seen and how it went, especially in the playoffs, it's just time that because here's the alternative: if you don't move on from Elam this offseason, he plays out the final year of his deal. You get nothing for him. So you either, if you can't trade him, really the only options here are you take on over $4 million of dead money, which you could do. He's not on your roster. You could do that and move on from him. They've had guys with dead money before, or you keep him on your roster for that and he just doesn't play, and then you lose him for nothing next year anyway.
There's not really good options here.
Right.
it's where it really ends up. It would stun me. I mean, we did just see Kirk, but Kirk is still a useful player. That, Houston could have just thought, I want to make sure I can get this guy, so I'll give up a 2026 7th rounder to make sure I get him in-house, and I'll take on the contract. With Elam, I mean, that's a guy that can't even get on the field. I just can't imagine a team would like him enough. Like, if I'm some GM that liked him a lot in the draft, and Bean knows that and calls the guy, if I'm the guy, I just go, I'm just going to wait for you to cut him. Thanks. Like, I'm not giving you anything. Yep. Why should I take him at that money to begin with? I mean, I could sign him for the minimum at this point if he's on the street. So I add all that up, and I think you're going to end up with no options there, really.
Right, and I do think there's always a possibility, as Mike, you brought up, that there's a GM that liked him and said, look, he comes to our system, he'll be better than he was for you. He's a man-to-man guy. A heavy man-to-man team says, you know what, we can work with him. We'll give you a 7th rounder. We'd rather get that before he goes to free agency and someone else takes him, so we can do that. So, yeah, I think there's always a possibility. What's interesting about Kirk is, I mean, they traded him to a divisional team, right? I mean, that's always interesting as well. So, yeah, it's interesting how that's going to work out.
You mentioned linebacker, and we haven't talked to you since you posted that. And I think the big question there is whether there's an adjustment coming to Milano's contract. I think you certainly, I want to hear what you think of this. I thought by the end of the year there, like I said frequently once he came back, what they're trying to do is get him up and running again. And I think that worked. I think by the end he looked more like Matt Milano that we were used to seeing. But still, it's a really big cap number for him at his age with his injury history. I wonder how cooperative he'd be about adjusting that.
Yeah, it's a good way you phrase it, because a pay cut of some sort. If you go to him and ask him for that, because they're not. There's almost no way they're cutting him before June 1st, or at least not designating him a June 1st cut. If they wanted to move on, if he didn't do something like that, because not only would they be taking on a massive cap penalty, they'd have no savings whatsoever, right? So they're just not going to do that. If you designated him a June 1st cut, then they would save $9.6 million. But that money wouldn't be available until June 1st to the Bills. They'd still take on over $6 million in dead cap space. So, I mean, unless that what you said happens, I think the way I look at it is, though, they could very well think, we can live with that number right now. We think that Matt is going to, I know for sure that they really believe that, Matt will do everything in his power to be as healthy as he can and work as hard to be on the field again. Of course, so he is going to be 31. He has had a couple of injuries here, and the way he plays, there's no guarantees anymore. I think it speaks volumes that they were willing to start this guy from the jump when he was ready over Dorian Williams. That might say more to me about what they think about Dorian Williams as a long-term starter than it does about Matt Milano, to be quite honest with you. So if your option is, okay, we go to him, he has to take a pay cut, he's not, are they going to move on? Well, are they that confident in Dorian Williams? I know Dorian Williams played well at times last year. I know he was the team's leading tackler. I'm just bringing the perspective of if the team said Matt Milano off these 2 injuries, he's the starter right away and we're putting him in right now, I think that should tell you something about how they feel about Dorian Williams as well.
Sal Capaccio on the West Her hotline. The Bills released Sam Martin, their punter, today for close to $2 million in cap space. That doesn't get him home, needing to be compliant by next week. What's left to do?
They have to really look at Von Miller's contract. I still am not sure what's going to happen there. I think that, they'd love to work out something where maybe Von is still in Buffalo at a pretty reduced rate, but how much does that? And is he willing to do that for 2 years in a row? There's no way they can live with his contract as it is right now, Von Miller and his cap hit. So that's one thing they have to do. They, I think, have to at least visit what's happening with Greg Rousseau's contract, and they could very well say we'll live with 13 plus million. They did it with whatever number it was, 12 plus million, I think, for Tremaine Edmonds a couple of years ago. He can go into the 5th year of his deal, and then we'll see. And then does he walk in free agency? But that might be the one where you can really do some real good clearing of your salary cap this year. Get it to about clear 10 million there, and then say, okay, now we'll sign him to an extension. The problem is, or question is, the extension number. What is that? But they have to get under the cap still. I think they still have to do quite a bit of maneuvering here. We're looking at probably around $10 million still. But look, guys, I mean, they could also extend or adjust Josh Allen and come up with a bunch of money as well right there. So there's a few things they need to get done here.
Yeah, what they really need to do, Sal, is clear money so they can acquire both Myles Garrett and DK Metcalf. Okay, I'm being a little cute here. But one of them, I mean, they're going to have a lot of work to do to pull off one of those. How realistic? I mean, what have you thought of the Metcalf stuff? It's been a little more than 24 hours, I guess, since we learned he was asking for a trade and that Seattle was, seemingly cooperative about working with him on that. What's your thought on the Bills and DK Metcalf?
Well, first, you guys know I'm very, very much into if the Bills could do anything they can to get Myles Garrett, they should do it. I just think that is the kind of player that changes an organization. It's the kind of player that, to me, he's a generational talent with still many years left. One of the greatest to ever play his position, still with a lot of years left. I don't feel that about DK Metcalf, but I really like DK Metcalf a lot. He's a fantastic player. There's no doubt. Myles Garrett is the best, arguably, but I'd say the best at what he does in the NFL at a critical position. DK Metcalf is one of the better receivers, one of the best, I could say. He's not the best at what he does, and that position has a lot of different guys. So how much are you really, yes, you'd be improving yourself, you'd be helping yourself. I don't think I'd want to do that to the tune of a first-round pick and $30 million on a next contract. And I just don't think that sounds like the kind of deal the Bills want to be in. Now, I'm not saying they wouldn't be interested in trading for DK Metcalf if they could. What did Deebo Samuel go for, a 5th? I understand different players here, but Deebo goes for a 5th. You trade a 3rd, maybe a 4th for or I guess one of their 4ths for DK Metcalf, sure. Or maybe a future draft pick, sure. Are you then signing him to $30 million? That just doesn't seem like the kind of business the Bills want to be in, even though he's a fantastic player and he's the kind of player they really need.
Okay. Why? Can you elaborate on that? Why would it not be the kind of move they would make, even though you think it's a fit? Is it because of his age or where that contract would take him? Is it because of like this year's philosophy and how adding this player would seem to kind of contradict what worked this year for them, I would say, overall? What's the issue?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, Mike. I think that it's the philosophy of everybody eats, and you don't have to call it that, but I do think they love the fact that Josh Allen just won MVP in part because this philosophy was better for him. He didn't have to look for one guy. He could look around the field. He could throw it to whoever's open. He has that kind of relief of, okay, I'm just going to play football here, throw it to whomever. And I think they like that. They like to enhance that more. I think they really have a firm belief that Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, and Dalton Kincaid are all going to be better than they were last year for mostly injury purposes. And, Coleman and what they said at the end of the year. Now, that's a lot to ask. That's 3 guys. You're asking for a jump and, be staying healthy all year. I get all that. But I think that they expect that to happen as well. And then it's just a lot of it to me financially, the money. It feels like the way they've operated at the position is that they're just not interested in adding a $30 million guy. Now, does it have to be $30 million? No. Can a team sign DK Metcalf to $25 million? Sure. And maybe that becomes a little bit more, palpable for the Bills to absorb. And they say, we could do that. We could do something like that. But how many years you given them? And then at what point? And you don't have to worry about that too much. There's always ways to adjust contracts down the road. I look at that sticker price, though, and say, you want me to give up compensation, and then I got to give this guy that contract. I know that the Myles Garrett is kind of the same way. Yeah. I don't care about that. This guy is way different.
Yeah. I've said a few times, we spend almost all day talking about Metcalf, and, I get drunk on these ideas sometimes, Sal. It's so exciting. I would prioritize Garrett over Metcalf myself, even though it's going to cost more all around. It's going to cost more compensation to the team I'm acquiring him from, and also the contract's going to even be bigger than what you're talking about. But I think the need is greater. And I think the potential to change your fortunes on that side of the ball are also greater. Like the first thing I said when we found out about DK Metcalf yesterday, I was still at home. My son came barreling downstairs like, DK Metcalf. And I'm like, how many more points are you going to score? Right. you already scored this many points. How much? Whereas on defense, especially if I move on from Miller, which I think is totally called for, I've got the potential to have a guy that's a defensive player of the year candidate. And that is, I would totally get prioritizing it. The problem is the timing. Is Cleveland, how earnest are they being? How honest are they being about not wanting to move him? Is it all posturing? Can you work a deal before the draft? Because if I got to wait until July or August when he doesn't show up to training camp, I don't know. That's tough. I've got a team that's a contending team, and I want to put it together. And I got to make moves if I can't get a guy like Myles Garrett. But if I can get him before the draft, I would prioritize him ahead of any receiver right now.
No doubt, I agree with all that, and I don't want it to sound like I think that DK Metcalf's a bad idea for the Bills. I'd love the idea of DK Metcalf on the Bills, and maybe Brandon Beane does. The thing we don't know, it just feels like, and I've felt this since they talked at the end of the season, like that they might be a little bit more aggressive and have some philosophical changes this offseason about how they've approached things and meaning more aggressive. And maybe that's something that they would do and say, look, it was great, what we did last year on offense, but we really truly needed that number one outside guy, and we're not sure if Keon Coleman's going to become that guy after what we saw. And then Brandon Beane goes, I'll go do this, and if that's what it takes. This isn't a great draft class. We're sitting at number 30. I think a number one is still really rich to give up for that. But either way, maybe I'm talking the contract here. You know what? I'll go do that. I'll give Seattle something, and I'll sign this guy. He's going to help me and Josh Allen here for years to come. So it just doesn't scream like the kind of move they would normally want to make here for that position. They've treated wide receiver really interesting. They've almost treated wide receiver like teams have really, like they've treated running back, to be quite honest with you, over the last several years, right? Which is, sure, they did take Keon Coleman with the first pick of the second round, but they're not going out there and, getting these high-priced guys. They're going kind of bargain shopping in free agency, whether that's Deontay Hardy or Mac Hollins, KJ Hamler they pick up and say, what can we do with him? They get rid of Stephon Diggs. They let Gabe Davis walk. It just feels like that. And then Curtis Samuel signs, and he's only quote unquote $8 million a year, right? That's not a huge deal for a wide receiver.
Yeah, Diggs is the one exception there, because that was this move. That was Metcalf 5 years ago, basically.
Right.
It's a similar stage in his career. He had a contract that the Bills inherited, and then I think he went through 2 years, and then they redid it, and then eventually they released him. So it didn't come immediately with a contract extension when they acquired Diggs. Whereas Metcalf probably would. He's going into the last year, and you wouldn't give up premium assets to a guy you were renting. So you'd expect that. So that's different. But, similar point in his career. And so, I don't know. But the question is now Allen is the MVP as opposed to when you acquired Diggs, he was just learning how to fly.
That's right. And I meant really since, over the last 4 years,
right.
kind of,
Gotcha.
since they did
right.
Diggs. Because they moved on from Diggs. But you're right, and it really did. That was a great trade for them. I mean, as much as it ended poorly with Stephon Diggs, it's exactly what they wanted to get from him, right? And they did exactly what they wanted. I remember, we have those meetings with Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. Basically, every year, Bill's PR invites us in, and we have these, they get embargoed, right? We can ask questions and stuff, but they say, hey, you guys can be here and you can write your stories about everything they say here. It's on the record, but we're going to wait to put everything out there. And I remember, it was right before the Diggs trade, the year before that maybe, and Brandon Beane's like, I think I got to get this guy number one wide receiver. That's kind of what he said to us. And sure enough, he went out and he did it in that next year. I think that different time, different circumstance, but certainly the way they thought about how they could elevate their offense. And who knows, maybe they feel they have to do something like that now.
Still the case, Kelvin Benjamin, the only first-round pick wide receiver Allen has had. Coleman being the first pick of the second round. I mean, they one fewer trade and they could avoid that. Metcalf would not change that either, as he was picked in round 2. Sal, thanks. Talk to you soon.
You got it, guys. Thanks.
There's also Capaccio on the West Her Hotline. His appearances are always brought to you by New York's only outlet liquor. When you need to stock up, it's the place to buy a case. What's your outlet?